Our honeymoon was ruined when my boyfriend decided to run away to his ex instead of me, and I was so shocked and hurt that I flew somewhere else. What happened next left him speechless. Miles and I had just gotten engaged less than a month ago, and we had planned a special trip, like an early honeymoon to unwind before the wedding preparations began. We had chosen our destination long in advance, and I had spent weeks planning everything, from our outfits, to planning out our day-by-day itinerary, up to making a little notebook to record our memorable moments. This trip was more than just a vacation for me, it was the beginning, a milestone that made me feel like we were truly starting a journey together. I still remember the excitement and nervousness as I packed my suitcase the night before our departure. I folded each dress carefully, not forgetting the soft white dress I planned to wear to our first dinner by the beach. I even prepared a small camera intending to capture every moment, something to look back on someday to see how we started. Miles didn't seem too excited, but I thought it was because he was busy. He had a lot of work these days, especially since he was competing for a promotion. I tried not to pay attention to the fact that he hadn't brought up the trip like before, because I believed that when we got there, he would relax, and everything would be back on track. That morning, he told me to go to the airport first, because he had an important meeting with a client. I was a little disappointed because I thought we would start this journey together, but he assured me that he would drive straight from the office to the airport, and we would meet at the gate. I didn't want to nag, so I just nodded. After all, I knew his work was stressful, and I figured, as long as we got on the plane together, it didn't matter too much whether we arrived first or last. Actually, I was a little angry. Partly because he couldn't arrange his work for this special day, partly because I felt like I was trying too hard to keep the excitement for both of us. But I kept quiet. I told myself that when he arrived, when we started our trip, all this feeling of loss would disappear. I arrived at the airport an hour early, checked in, went through security, and sat in the boarding area with a coffee. I texted him a simple "I'm here. Don't be late." He didn't reply right away, but I figured he was probably in a meeting. I sat there checking my watch, and when the electronic board announced that the boarding gate was open, I started to worry. And then, my phone lit up. It was a text from Miles. Just one line: "I can't go anymore. Nina's in trouble. I have to go help her. I'm sorry." I read it over and over, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I didn't understand what was going on. Nina was his ex, someone I'd been worried about many times but always swallowed back because he'd said they were just friends, that there was nothing between them. I didn't know what made me angrier: that he'd canceled at the last minute, or that she'd been the one to change his plans. No call, no explanation, no sign of regret or remorse. Just a few words, a text message, as if I wasn't worth another minute of conversation. I sat there for almost an hour, heart empty, not knowing what to do. I looked around, saw couples holding hands, people preparing for happy holidays, then looked back at myself, sitting quietly with a suitcase beside me. And a ticket that no longer meant anything. The trip I had been waiting for turned out to be just me. No warning, no proper apology, just a short text message and a cold disappearance. The anger inside me did not explode loudly. It rose slowly, coldly, as if something inside me had just broken, and was more sober than ever. I stood up, dragged my suitcase to the ticket counter, booked the earliest flight to where my sister lived. I did not want to go home. I did not want to answer any questions. I just wanted to disappear from this place, the place where I had believed I would start a new chapter with the person I loved. But that chapter was never written. And the person I was supposed to hold hands with did not choose me at the time I needed him the most. I don't know how I managed to walk out of the airport with such a blank mind. Everything around me became blurry, not because I was crying, but because I couldn't feel anything clearly anymore. It was as if my body was still moving on instinct, and the rest of me was frozen in the boarding area, right at the moment that message appeared on the screen. That fateful flight, where I had thought it would start beautifully with the person I loved, now had only me and my suitcase dragging across the cold stone floor. And the worst part was that I had no idea where to go next. I stood there in the bustling crowd, listening to the loudspeaker calling out to passengers for the last time, knowing that this was a flight I would never board. I opened my phone, looked at that short message, and locked the screen. No further explanation, no follow-up calls. I waited. Some part of me still hoped he would call, if only to say sorry in a voice, not in a blunt, emotionless text. But he didn't, and as another 15 minutes passed, I knew I couldn't stand there forever. I had to do something, not to react to him but to save myself from being abandoned. I dragged my suitcase to the ticket counter of another airline without thinking much about it. I didn't want to go home, didn't want to step into an apartment where everything reminded me of Miles. I just wanted to be somewhere else, somewhere with someone who understood me, where I didn't have to pretend to be okay. I opened my phone and texted my sister a quick note, "I'm flying to you. Don't ask any questions right now." And then I booked the earliest flight to the city where she lived. I didn't know when I would be back. In fact, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be back. On the plane, I couldn't sleep. I sat there, clutching my phone, even though I wasn't doing anything with it. My mind was racing with 100 unanswered questions. Why her? Why today? And why me, left out as if my existence were just an afterthought in his plans? I started remembering everything from the times Miles had referred to Nina as an old friend, to the times he'd assured me that there was nothing between them. And I, foolish enough to believe that love can overcome all insecurities with just patience and trust. But it turns out there are limits that, when crossed, no amount of faith can hold me back. My sister picked me up at the airport without saying much. Her hug was enough to let me know that I still had a place to return to. I stayed in my room for the first 2 days, not opening my phone, not replying to any messages. I knew Miles was texting, but I didn't want to read it. I didn't need to hear another apology, especially when his actions were clearer than any excuse. On the 3rd day, my sister gently said, "Let's go out for a bit tonight. Not to forget, but to let you breathe." I was silent for a moment and then nodded. I didn't want to be happy. But I also didn't want to continue sitting here and tearing myself apart. We went to a small bar, not too crowded, the lights were warm and dim, the music was just loud enough not to bother my ears. I didn't intend to drink much, but the first drink went by faster than I thought. Then came the second drink, and I began to feel my body release some of the invisible tension that had been building for the past 3 days. As a familiar song came on, I felt my sister smile and pull me onto the dance floor. I hesitated for a few seconds, then let my body move. For the first time in weeks, I didn't think about Miles. I'd taken a few pictures that night, me dancing, laughing, cocktails in hand, surrounded by strange, vibrant women. I hadn't intended to send them to anyone. But when I opened my phone and saw the long list of unread messages from Miles, I snapped a few more faces, scenery, me, and sent them to him. No captions. I didn't need to write anything. I wanted him to see. Not because I was seeking revenge, but because I wanted him to know what it felt like to be left behind. I wanted him to know that when he chose to go back to the past, I chose to move forward without him. I don't know what he felt when he saw those pictures. But I knew exactly what I felt, not joy, not relief, but affirmation, that I would no longer be the girl who waited silently. I was on another flight, going somewhere else, in a completely new direction. And this time, I was flying alone, with no one to lean on, but no one to disappoint me either. I don't know what Miles' reaction was to receiving those photos, but within hours, my phone started ringing off the hook. Texts, calls first from him, then his mother, his sister, and even my mother. I didn't read them all, but the first few lines were enough to make it clear. They thought I'd crossed the line. They told me I was immature, thoughtless, acting impulsively. That instead of making a big deal out of it, I should have sat down and talked to Miles properly. That I'd hurt him. That I was making everyone worry, and both families were embarrassed by my actions. I read those words in silence, neither angry nor sad. In fact, the only thing I felt was a deep fatigue. Because once again, I was the one being analyzed, judged, when no one really wanted to hear why I was hurt. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. Not texting anyone back. Because I know if I say I feel betrayed, they'll say, but he was just helping a friend who was hurt. If I say I think she hasn't let him go, they'll say you're being too jealous. And if I say he should have been with you, not her, someone will say I'm being selfish. I know, I'm used to that kind of advice. Especially from outsiders who don't know how many times I've had to swallow my insecurities. how many times I've had to pretend to be okay whenever Nina's name comes up in conversation. They don't know, and they don't want to know how much patience I've had to put up with to keep my relationship with Miles from falling apart. I've felt uncomfortable with Nina many times, but I've never discouraged Miles from seeing her. He always said there was nothing more between them than friendship, and I chose to believe him. I was there for him at the social gatherings where Nina was always present. I sat there trying to laugh and talk while she always tried to get his attention, always the one to start a conversation, always the center of attention whenever he was around. I used to think that if I trusted him enough, if I didn't let jealousy break the trust, then sooner or later everything would be fine. But no one taught me that trust also needs to be nurtured by transparency and priority. And in this relationship, I was always the one waiting for that from him, while he took my silent suffering for granted. I remember most clearly one evening last year, when Miles took me to meet his college friends for the first time. Nina was there, of course. Everything was fine at first. She smiled and talked to me very gently, even politely. But as time went on, as more alcohol entered her discomfort became more obvious. She started talking more, laughing louder every time Miles spoke, and always seemed to find a way to create a space just for the two of them. I was left as an outsider, even though I was sitting right next to my lover. I told Miles about it after I got home, and all he said was, "She must have been a little drunk." I don't think she meant anything by it. And then it was over. As if my feelings were some weak thing that wasn't worth worrying about. This time was no different. When Miles chose to go to Nina's house instead of the airport, he didn't call me to explain why. No persuasion, no negotiation, no serious apology. Just a text, as if I didn't matter enough to be explained. And then, when I responded by flying away, by being silent, by sending him a few pictures to remind him that I could do without him, I was the problem. I felt ridiculous. I had been hurt, but I had to apologize for being hurt. I had been abandoned, but I was criticized for not being silent and waiting for him to come back. But this time, I didn't stay silent. I didn't argue, but I didn't compromise. I didn't send another text to Miles. I didn't call my mom to explain. I stayed at my sister's house, cooked with her, cleaned, went for walks, and found my rhythm little by little. I let myself be sad when I needed to be, angry when I had to be, and silent when I had nothing left to say. And as the days passed, I realized more and more my silence was not suffering, but my way of preserving my self-respect. I didn't need people to understand. I just needed to understand myself. And now I understood I had tolerated long enough and it was time to stop being patient. I didn't answer anyone, nor did I tell Miles that I was coming back. Actually, I hadn't made any clear decisions yet. Part of me was still in the process of healing. The other part was trying to figure out how much I had been hurt. But then one morning, when I woke up earlier than usual, seeing the sunlight slanting through my sister's window, I suddenly felt like I wanted to end it all, clearly, decisively, without any ambiguity. I wanted to go back to the house I used to call home, not to forgive, not to start over, but just to face what had been hanging between us all these days. I wanted to hear from Miles's own mouth an explanation that was enough for me to put an end to it, because I didn't want to be hanging in a place where no one bothered to pull me down. I flew back early that morning without telling anyone. I called a cab from the airport and headed straight home. On the way, I imagined countless scenarios: that he would open the door, looking tired, that he would be surprised and embarrassed to see me, or that he would break down and apologize to me with all his might. But when the car stopped, I got out and stood in front of the house. The first thing that made me uneasy was everything was exactly as it had been the day I left. The door was locked, the lights were off, there was no sign of anyone living there. I unlocked it, walked in, and immediately felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The house was completely silent. There was no smell of food, no music, no life. The dishes were still unwashed in the sink. My coat was still hanging on the chair. Everything was as if time had stopped since I left. My heart started pounding. I called Miles. At first he didn't answer. The second time he did, his voice was hazy, as if he had just woken up. I told him I was home. He was silent for a few seconds, then just said, "Wait for me a moment, I'll be right back." No questions, no surprise, no explanation. It was just a short command, and I, for some reason, stayed behind to wait. About an hour later, he arrived home. He had no suitcase, no laptop, just a few things in his pocket and a tired face. I looked at him, saying nothing, and then the question popped out of my mouth so light that even I was surprised. "Where have you been these past few days?" He didn't answer right away. He just stood there looking at me for a long time, as if considering whether to tell the truth or continue lying. And then he sighed, lowered his head, and repeated the 3 words I feared the most: Nina's place. My whole body froze. Even though a part of me had a premonition, hearing him say it out loud still felt like someone had hit me in the chest with a hammer. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, listening to him tell me that she was in pain, that no one was around, that her friends were busy, and that her family was far away, that she needed someone to take care of her, that he was only helping as an old friend, that he was sleeping on the sofa, that there was absolutely nothing going on between them. But I don't care where he slept or what he did. I care why he was there all week without saying a word to me. And while I was being criticized by both families for my thoughtless actions, a mature person like him was living at his ex's house, hiding the truth as if it was nothing worth mentioning. He said he didn't know where to start explaining. I said I should have started when I called you at the airport. He was speechless. I continued, "If I hadn't come back today, would you have told me? Or would you have let me think you were living alone and sad because I hurt you?" He didn't answer. And that silence was the clearest answer I needed. I walked into the bedroom, took the small suitcase that was still there, threw in the remaining clothes, the personal belongings that I left behind, as if I would be back soon, and then I dragged the suitcase out of the room, walked past him, who was still standing in the middle of the living room like a shadow, not knowing how to hold on. He asked, "Where are you going?" I turned around, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Get away from me." Then I walked out the door without looking back. I didn't cry. Not then. Maybe later, but not when I left. Because in that moment, I knew one thing. This was no longer a relationship that could be repaired with an apology or a promise to change. This was something I had held on to for too long, and it was rotting from the inside without me even knowing it. I went back to my parents' house that afternoon. No warning, no knocking, just dragging my suitcase in like a girl who had just survived a storm and needed My mother saw me and panicked, and my father just sighed and pulled me into his arms without asking a word. I don't know what they had heard from the Miles family or what they were thinking, but at least in that moment, I didn't feel like I had to explain right away. I needed a few days to calm down, and I got them. 2 days later, when I told her everything, from the airport text message to Miles's chilling confession that he'd spent a week at his ex's house, my mother was silent for a long time. She'd said I was a little sensitive about Nina in the past, but this time she said nothing. She just held my hand and said, "If you've had enough, you don't have to try anymore." I had enough. I knew it, and for the first time, I felt like I didn't need to convince anyone that my feelings were valid. I spent the next few days sorting through my thoughts, but I didn't contact Miles. I had nothing to say. I knew, somehow, that he would come back to me soon. Not because he knew he was wrong, but because for once I was the one who turned my back first. And it happened sooner than I thought. Less than 2 weeks after I left that house, I received a text from an old friend with a link. I opened it and couldn't believe my eyes. It was Nina, in a white wedding dress, holding hands with a man I'd never met. Below the post were hundreds of congratulatory comments, pictures of the gorgeous wedding, pictures of the bride beaming with happiness. I read every line, every caption, every blessing, and it felt like I was seeing everything I had feared, everything I had tried to ignore, laid out before me in such stark clarity. It turned out that all this time, Nina had been preparing for her wedding. While Miles had left me at the airport to be with her, she was about to marry another man. While he lived at her house for a week, thinking he was helping, she was probably just letting him take care of her while she waited for her wedding dress to arrive. I sat there silently for a long time, not because I was angry, but because everything seemed ridiculous. I was in pain. I was torn between wondering if I was too sensitive. I blamed myself for leaving, for sending those childish photos. And now, when I saw the truth, I only felt sorry for myself, for sacrificing so much trust for someone who always put me in second place. Miles called me that same day. I didn't have to guess why. His voice was shaky, almost disoriented. He said, I didn't know anything. She didn't say a word to me about getting married. I felt like I was being led by the nose." I I was silent. He continued, "Since you left, I've thought a lot. And I know, if there's one person I can't lose, it's you." He said he was sorry, that he was so stupid, that he didn't know how to appreciate me, that he thought he was doing the right thing, but ended up ruining everything. That if I could give him a chance, just one chance, he would prove everything he had missed. I sat there listening to him speak, listening to his choked voice like a betrayed person. But the strange thing was I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, no pity. I just felt calm. Maybe because I had gone through all the layers of emotions, or maybe because I knew his apology now no longer carried remorse, but was just the result of a shock he did not expect. If Nina had not married someone else, would he have called me? If she still needed him, would he have realized that I was there waiting for him with all the love and hope? I did not need to know the answer, I just knew. I did not want to hear anything more. When he asked, "Can you forgive me?" I just gently said, "I forgive, but I cannot go back." There was a long silence on the phone, then he hung up. I looked out the window, watching the afternoon sunlight spread across the treetops. I felt nothing but the feeling that I had just put down something that had been too heavy for too long. I had not won the emotional battle. I had no one to win back. But by refusing to go back to someone who didn't choose me in the first place, I knew I had just protected the most precious thing, my self-respect. After that last call, I knew I wouldn't hear Miles' voice again, not because he didn't want to, but because he understood. It was time to let go. Just like me, the one who had held on to this relationship with all the trust and tolerance I had, now had no reason to continue. I had nothing left to expect from him, and I didn't need another apology. Not because I didn't want to forgive, but because I had forgiven, and it was that forgiveness that gave me the right to walk away without any attachment. I didn't cry after that call. I just sat quietly, still holding the phone with the screen off, my eyes looking towards the window where the afternoon sun was gradually setting. Maybe I should feel sad, but all I felt was peace, a stillness that was so real, so deep, so light. It was as if I had finally let go of the burden I had been carrying around all this time. I no longer struggled between staying and going, no longer wondered if I was wrong to react so strongly, no longer felt the need to prove to anyone that my feelings were valid. I only know I made the right choice. I chose myself. Actually, to get to this point, I went through a lot of doubts and self-blame. I used to think that maybe I was too sensitive, too impatient, too afraid of losing. I used to compare myself to Nina in terms of appearance, in terms of confidence, in terms of the way she always knew what she wanted. I used to wonder if I were more generous, more easygoing, would Miles have chosen me more easily? But then I realized love is not about trying to fit in with someone, but being able to be yourself and still be appreciated by that person. I don't need to become any other version, don't need to compete with anyone, and even less need to force myself to be okay when I'm broken inside. I don't hate Nina, really. She may have been unfair, may have taken advantage of Miles' kindness, may have thoughtlessly put him in a position that hurt others, but she doesn't owe me anything. The one who owed me was Miles. The one who chose her over me, the one who was dishonest when a call should have been enough to keep me from feeling left behind. But now, it doesn't matter anymore. Who's right, who's wrong, that's no longer something I need to dig into, because in the end, the person I need to save the most is myself. I didn't choose revenge. I didn't post mean things, I didn't gossip, I didn't use my pain to create a dramatic retaliation. Instead, I chose silence. I chose to walk away. And that calmness, that initiative is my greatest victory, because I know that if I stay just to prove myself right, I'm still dependent on the recognition of others. But when I let go, I walk away without a word. That's when I truly take control of my own story. If you've come this far with me, listening to this whole journey, then perhaps somewhere in my story, you've also seen a part of yourself. Maybe you've also been left behind in an important decision. Maybe you've also found yourself the second choice in someone's heart. And maybe you have also wondered if you are doing too much, asking for too much just because you want to be prioritized, to be loved properly. I want to tell you this: you are not wrong, you are not weak, and you are not selfish when you choose to walk away from a place that no longer makes you feel seen, heard. There are people who will make you humble yourself little by little, make you doubt your own feelings, make you mature to the point of suffocating the real hurt that exists in your heart. But you deserve more than that. You deserve a love that doesn't need to compete for a place in someone's heart. You deserve someone who sees you even when you haven't said a word. I'm not sure I've completely overcome everything. There are still nights when I lie quietly staring at the ceiling and remembering. But unlike before, I'm no longer afraid of that past. I look back to know how strong I was, to know that I loved so much, so deeply, and finally have the courage to love myself more than loneliness. Maybe the journey ahead still has many uncertainties, but I no longer walk with a heart full of doubt. If this story has touched you, if you have ever found yourself lost in a relationship where you have had to struggle alone for too long, then remember, you always have the right to choose again. You always have the right to say enough. And if you want to continue accompanying me in stories of healing, growing up, and finding yourself after being broken, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because here, we don't just tell stories to remember, but also to know that we deserve to be loved in the most complete and correct way.